A woman sits at her kitchen table on a Tuesday night staring at a laptop full of unpaid invoices. Her shoulders are tight. Her breathing is shallow. She hasn't said a word out loud in 20 minutes. Curled up on the floor beside her chair, her border collie lifts its head, ears pinned slightly back, and lets out a long sigh through its nose. It hasn't seen the invoices. It doesn't know what money is. But somewhere inside that dog's body, a hormone called cortisol is climbing, almost in lockstep with hers. That's not a metaphor. It's a measurable, published finding. Scientists have taken hair samples from dogs and their owners months apart in different seasons and found that the two sets of readings rise and fall together with startling precision. Not because the dog is anxious about money, not because it understands deadlines or arguments or grief. Somehow, an animal with no concept of a bank account has a stress hormone system that tracks its owner's life almost as closely as its own. That should be strange. Evolution doesn't usually build systems for free. A dog's body spending energy adjusting its hormone levels to match a completely different species, one with an entirely different set of problems, sounds like exactly the kind of biological waste that natural selection tends to eliminate. So why does it exist? Why would an animal's internal chemistry bend itself around the emotional weather of somebody else's day? The answer starts with a Swedish research team, a fistful of dog hair, and a question nobody had actually tested before. In 2019, ethologist Ann-Sofie Sundman at Linköping University in Sweden set out to measure something that had never been directly studied in a dog-human pair: long-term stress. Not the spike and fade kind you get from a single bad afternoon, but the slow burn kind that builds up over months. Sundman's team recruited 58 dog owner pairs, all female owners working with two breeds known for close working relationships with people: Shetland sheepdogs and border collies. Instead of drawing blood or swabbing saliva, which only capture a stress reaction in the moment, the researchers clipped hair. Hair grows slowly, and as it grows, it locks in a running record of the cortisol, circulating through the body over the previous weeks. It's less like a snapshot and more like a security camera that's been recording the whole time. They took samples twice, once reflecting the summer months, once reflecting winter, from both the dogs and their owners. Then they compared the two datasets. What they found was reported that year in the journal Scientific Reports. The dogs' long-term cortisol levels lined up with their owners almost point for point. Owners running high, their dogs running high. Owners running low, their dogs running low. And critically, when Sundman's team checked which direction the influence was flowing, using personality questionnaires filled out for both species, they found the dogs' own temperaments barely predicted their stress levels at all. What predicted a dog's cortisol was the owner's personality, traits like neuroticism and how conscientious a person was. In other words, the dog wasn't dragging the human's mood around. The human was setting the tone, and the dog's body was quietly falling in line behind it. There was one more detail buried in that data that made the picture even stranger. The synchronization was strongest, not in relaxed house pets, but in dogs that competed with their owners in agility and obedience trials. The dogs with the tightest working partnership, the ones who spent the most hours reading their handlers' cues under pressure, were the ones whose stress hormones tracked their owners most closely. That's the opposite of what you'd expect if this was some kind of background biological noise. It looks instead like a system that gets stronger the more two individuals depend on reading each other correctly. A follow-up study 2 years later pushed the question further, this time across 42 different breeds, comparing ancient breeds with a closer genetic thread back to wolves against breeds developed for independent hunting work. The researchers found that the strongest predictor of a dog's long-term stress wasn't the breed's genetic history at all. It was something closer to relationship quality, specifically how much an owner perceived their dog as effortful, a burden, rather than a source of enjoyment. Dogs living with owners who experienced the relationship as more of a cost than a benefit ran hotter, hormonally, over the long term. The dog's stress response was tracking something almost impossible to observe directly: how their owner privately felt about having them in the house. So the synchronization is real, and it runs owner to dog far more than dog to owner. But that still leaves the harder question sitting there unanswered. How does a dog without language, without any understanding of invoices or arguments or grief, actually pick up on a mood well enough to shift its own body chemistry to match it? Part of the answer arrived in a study published in 2014 by psychologists Min Hui Yong and Ted Ruffman, who tested how dogs respond to the sound of an unfamiliar human infant crying. The dogs weren't just behaviorally unsettled. Their cortisol measurably rose. So did the cortisol of the humans in the room. The dogs weren't reacting to a threat. They were reacting to distress itself, the acoustic signature of another creature in trouble, and their bodies answered with the same hormonal shift a human's would. That's only the auditory channel. A separate line of research led by comparative psychologist Corsin Muller and published in Current Biology in 2015 found that dogs can reliably tell the difference between a genuinely happy human face and a genuinely angry one, even from photographs of people they've never met, using only half a face at a time. Dogs, it turns out, are picking up an entire cross-referenced picture: tone of voice, facial muscle configuration, posture, and, according to more recent physiological work, even subtle shifts in scent, since stress hormones change the chemical makeup of human sweat in ways a dog's nose is more than capable of detecting. Underneath all of that sensory pickup sits a hormone doing double duty: oxytocin. Emory University psychiatry researcher Larry Young has described the bond between dogs and owners as a kind of feedback loop, where eye contact and gentle touch trigger oxytocin release in both species simultaneously, each one's calm reinforcing the others. It's the same neurochemical circuitry that bonds a mother to an infant, repurposed across a species boundary that never existed until dogs and humans started sharing campfires. Layered together, the auditory cues, the facial reading, the scent detection, and the oxytocin loop form a genuinely rich channel for one nervous system to quietly synchronize with another. Multiple research teams now frame this as emotional contagion, one of the oldest and simplest forms of empathy in the animal kingdom, requiring no theory of mind, no understanding of the reason behind the emotion, just a direct, almost reflexive absorption of it. Which raises the obvious next question. If dogs do this because roughly 15 to 30,000 years of living directly alongside humans rewired them to track our emotional signals as a survival strategy, watching our faces, guarding our infants, working our land, does the same thing happen in a species that domesticated itself far more recently, far more loosely, and never had to cooperate with us this closely to survive? Does your cat do this too? For a long time, researchers assumed the answer was mostly no, on the grounds that cats simply aren't built for this kind of cooperative signal reading. But the last several years of research have started to complicate that assumption. A 2019 study published in PLOS 1 found that cats altered their behavior specifically in response to a human crying nearby, spending more time close to the person and increasing affiliative behavior like rubbing and purring, compared to when the same person was simply talking in a neutral tone. Separate hair cortisol research on cats has found that felines showing behavioral problems in the home, aggression, inappropriate elimination, run measurably higher long-term cortisol than cats without those issues, suggesting that whatever is happening in the household is showing up in the cat's own hormone levels, not just its behavior. And in 2025, a study on oxytocin during cat-owner interaction found something almost identical to the dog research, just quieter. Cats classified as securely attached to their owner showed a genuine oxytocin surge during affectionate contact they initiated themselves, lap-sitting, nudging, choosing to be close. Cats with anxious or avoidant attachment styles showed a different pattern entirely. Their oxytocin actually dropped when contact was forced on them rather than offered. The mechanism looks remarkably similar to the dog studies. The emotional weather in the house is landing on the animal's own physiology. It's just wrapped in a species that shows almost none of it on the outside. Which brings the whole question back around to that woman at the kitchen table and the dog sighing on the floor beside her. The dog isn't sighing because it understands invoices. It's sighing because, over tens of thousands of years, dogs were shaped by a selection pressure that rewarded the individuals who read human distress accurately and responded to it. First because it kept them fed and sheltered, and eventually because it kept an entire species welcome in our homes. The stress hormone climbing in that dog's bloodstream isn't sympathy in the way we describe it in a human. It's a biological instrument, tuned by thousands of generations, quietly picking up a signal it was built to receive. Which means the mouse-sized surprise sitting underneath a very large phenomenon is this. Your pet's stress levels are, in a very real physiological sense, a mirror pointed back at your own household. And the calibration didn't happen because animals evolved to worry about our lives. It happened because the ones who could read us best were the ones who got to stay. If you want more videos that dig into the strange, ancient science hiding underneath ordinary pet behavior, subscribe. We put one out every week.